Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us again this week. This week we focus on the fact that David Granger and the Partnership for National Unity are calling for the People's Progressive Party civic government to reset their policies that the partnership believe is not benefiting Guyana, policies that are doing more good than bad. Welcome back, Mr. David Granger, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition.
Thank you very much, Malika.
Right. Great to have you. It is interesting that APNU is asking the PPPC to reset their policies. After 21 years, how easy it is for the PPPC to reset their policies after they would have gotten accustomed to governing the way that they do?
Well, it's easy enough, Malika. I think that they need to pay attention to what the people are saying. They need to pay attention to the headlines in the daily newspaper. And they could see that many of their basic policies are simply not working. Most obviously, you can see that the situation in the public security sector is extremely grave. I mean, in fact, during the past week, the PPP has had to resort to setting up a SWAT, a Special Weapons and Tactics Team. This is something they spoke of over 10 years ago when we had the troubles on the East Coast and elsewhere. So you can see that they themselves have come to the conclusion that the crime situation is spiraling out of control. I don't agree with the remedy, but at least they know that something is going wrong. Perhaps their own supporters have told them that the violent crime is unsustainable, that it is abnormal, it's extraordinary, and they need to do something about it. And they've decided to establish a SWAT team. But we've known for years that the People's Progressive Party is not paying attention to piracy, is not paying attention to banditry, is not paying attention to cocaine smuggling, is not paying attention to gun running. And what we see happening today on the streets of Guyana, the streets of Georgetown in particular, and even hinterland, on the coastline, is an accumulation of years of neglect. We see the results in violent crime because people feel they can get guns and commit crimes, they could pay people to execute others with impunity. So the crime situation, I think, has been fully brought home to the PPP, and they realize they have something to do. After 21 years, they have been unable to implement the measures which have been recommended by the Discipline Forces Commission and by several overseas studies. And as a result of that, we have a bad crime situation.
If I can pause on the issue of policies for a bit, you did mention SWAT. I know this discussion is doesn't speak specifically to crime, but you mentioned the establishment of the SWAT team. Are you not concerned that yourself and your partnership would be criticized for criticizing the SWAT team because you were calling for drastic measures to be taken to reduce the crime situation in Guyana? Are you not concerned now that you'll be verbally attacked for saying that SWAT is not enough?
Well, after 21 years, the PPP has shown itself to be incapable of solving the crime problem. And the point I'd like to make is that there are several studies, and I participated in one of them, the Discipline Forces Commission. And if those recommendations were implemented, we would not need to resort to SWAT, the SWAT teams. But we recommended that we should look at the police force in a holistic manner and try to improve the quality of policing, better pay, better training, better equipment. And if these measures were implemented, I'm convinced that we would have less violent crime. Now, in addition to that, we've had in the security sector something called the National Drug Strategy Master Plan. And we've had the British recommendation, the Security Sector Reform Action Plan. Now, the National Drug Strategy Master Plan expired 2 years ago, and the government has not replaced it. And of course, you know very well the story of the British Security Sector Action Plan. They just threw it through the window. Here it was, the British government several years ago was offering the government of Guyana £4.9 million sterling grant to implement security sector reform. And the government of President Jagdeo just threw it away. So we have enough information to indicate that the government simply has not been implementing the scheme. So I have no compunction about criticizing the SWAT team. It's not the way to go. It is not necessary. It will not solve crime. What needs to be done is that the Guyana Police Force needs to have root and branch reform. It needs better training. It needs better equipment. The policemen need to be brought up to strength. They need to be paid better. They need to be better officered. All of these recommendations were made 10 years ago in the Disciplined Forces Commission. But that is only one of the PPP's faults over the last 21 years. If you cast your eyes on any single sector of government, you will see how dissatisfied the people are and how haphazard and ad hoc the PPP's policies were. So if you want, you can look at education, you can look at infrastructure, you can look at employment, and you see the same story.
All right, coming back to policies, as you did bring it back. Now, as the PPPC prepared to observe 21 years in office, APNU is saying that, and I'm quoting from a press release here, APNU is saying that it should use this occasion for a retreat in order to review its policies and resume serious engagements with opposition so that the country can move forward. It here being the PPPC government. So my question basically is, was there a time when government actually had serious engagements with opposition, and were those engagements fruitful, benefiting our people in any way?
I don't think that I can say that there were engagements.
Okay.
Literally from 1st of December, I met Mr. Kemrat Ramjatan and Mr. Don Ramatar, and we committed ourselves to dialogue. And since then, there has been some talk, but we do not feel that the results, the outcome of those talks, had been beneficial to the country as a whole. For example, in the middle of the budget debate in April, Mr. Ramjatan and I signed a joint letter to President Ramatar, and nothing that we asked for, even though it was emergency, even though the budget debate was already going on, nothing we asked for was granted. So we tried talking, but what I'm suggesting here is that the PPP do some soul searching. They meet among themselves, and perhaps it's time to clean out the cabinet. Some people have been serving in the cabinet, like Mr. Clement Roy. He's been there for 21 years. He's bound to be exhausted. And I think that the PPP should have a retreat. Let him go to some resort in the hinterland, in Baganar or Irokram or somewhere, and look at the situation which they find. I'm not talking about going to a PPP Congress. I'm talking about going into a retreat so they can get the best advice, they can discuss things frankly, without the pressure of telephones, without the pressure of the media, without the pressure of even time, and look critically at where they brought Guyana after 21 years. And I think they will come to the same conclusion the majority of Guyanese have come to, that the PPP has run off the rails, the policy has run off the rails, and the form of governance they're practicing is simply not benefiting the Guyanese people. That is what I want. I mean, it's a bit idealistic, it's a bit hopeful, but at least it'll give them an opportunity to sit down among themselves and see what the other people are saying, what the rest of the country is saying. Hey, we're not satisfied with this crime situation. We're not satisfied with Mr. Rohi's stewardship as Minister of Home Affairs.
Apart from your suggestions for probably a cabinet clean-out and a retreat, do you believe that they actually have good policies, but there's bad management of the policies, or the policies need to be changed in general?
They have bad priorities. I mean, it's difficult to complain about some of the policies. Yes, maybe you can say that Guyana needs a bigger airport, but when, in due course, our lives are an accumulation of choices, and what has happened in this situation here? The government seems to have embarked on certain choices, for example, going after specialty hospital, and basic health care is so backward, so poor. We had children early this year dying from gastroenteritis. About 10 children died in the Burima-Waini region. 530 or thereabouts got ill. Only last month we had a child dying probably from gastro. We weren't told the exact cause. at a place called Mascaneri in the South Rupununi. But if you go around the country, you'd see that the quality of healthcare delivery, is still quite low. Dental, physical, when you look at communicable diseases, when you look at malaria and other diseases, you'd see that it is really quite low, and we don't have to go the way of maternal deaths. But when you look at those basics, you'll see that the government is just not getting it right. So they have to make choices. It is not that a bridge is bad, but is it the best type of bridge? Because we need now a better bridge over the Demerara River. Everyone knows that the bridge between Bagotstown and the West Bank, is on its last legs. And the PPP seems to be waiting on some disaster to occur. No, there's no ferry, there's no backup. If that bridge goes down, Georgetown is going to suffer tremendously, because a lot of working people, a lot of commodities come from the West Bank, come from the West Coast, come from further afield, they come from the hinterland, they come from Bartica. All of them come over the bridge. But the PPP is building a hotel. We do not need a hotel at this point in time. Maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, we do not need a hotel right now. And it's a question of prioritization. It's not a question of yes or no. It's a question of when these things will be put on stream. So I have no objection to a bridge. I have no objection to a hotel. But the question is, we cannot do both, and we must make a choice.
What can David Granger and the Partnership for National Unity do to get the government to involve the opposition and civil society a little more when it comes to dealing with policies and general development of our nation?
We've done everything that is humanly possible, and what is left to us now is to take action on the floor of the National Assembly. We'll bring motions, we'll bring bills, we'll have debates, and we'll keep legitimate pressure on the government to change its policies. It may take a bit of time, but we are confident that sooner or later constant dripping will wear away the stone, and we feel that constant pressure is eventually going to take a toll on the government, and they'll bring about a change. For example, it is quite clear that people have been talking to the government about the crime situation, and as a result of that, they've decided to introduce an extraordinary measure called the SWAT. And I think if we can get more people in civil society talking to them about the different areas, for example, education. We've spent a lot of time talking about education, and there has been something akin to a revolt during the month of September. In Mahdia, in Port Kaituma, in Georgetown, and East Berbice, parents were dissatisfied on day 1 or day 2 or day 20 or day 30 after the schools were opened. Sooner or later, they will get the idea that something is very badly wrong in the primary school system and put it right. So what can we do? We can keep the pressure up and bring pressure to bear on the People's Progressive Party civic administration in the hope that sooner rather than later they'll change. So right now we're still within a legal and orderly legislative framework.
If I can come off of education, crime and infrastructure for a bit, just to stretch it, how have these policies that you're calling for to be reset, how have these policies damaged or hindered economic development in Guyana?
Well, to start with, education perhaps is the single most important, because if children are not properly educated, it will affect the employment, and we have a lot of unemployed young people nowadays. In addition to that, we will not be able to train a cadre of scientists, of engineers, of technicians and technologists who we need to develop the country. So when we speak of education, it is not an ornamental issue that we just want to have a lot of graduates. We want to develop the country. So by failing to implement education reforms, we are actually underdeveloping Guyana. That is the problem we want to bring to the attention of the government in that area. Similarly, if you look at other areas like infrastructure, if you have a potentially rich region like the Barima-Waini region, bigger than Trinidad and Tobago, if you only give the people there, electrical power 6 hours a day, How can they go about their business? How can they have manufacturing? How can they have industries? Similarly, the waterfront at Kumaka, if it is susceptible to erosion, if it's, the banks are falling into the Aruka River, it will hinder development. People will not be able to take ferries, they will not be able to unload their goods, and things will go very slowly in terms of the economic revival of that region, the economic development of that region. So by its policy, the PPP is actually failing not only the hinterland region, some of the coastal regions as well.
But one might argue that with the PPP, we saw the Providence Stadium, we saw the Burpees Bridge, we saw the building of new schools, possibly a new court, a new magistrate court. That might be an argument.
Well, it is true that these buildings have been set up, but as I said, the story of your life is the story of the choices you made. And when if on the one hand you can say, okay, there's a stadium, but on the other hand I can say there are so many school dropouts because the school system is broken. I think a government has to decide whether it will build stadiums or build first-class schools. If we have a university, we need to put a certain amount of money in that university for it to produce the quality graduates. Yes, it's like giving a child ice cream or giving a child, maybe some nutritious cereal. After a while, the child is going to suffer. Maybe ice cream is tasty and sweet, but eventually the child will not get the nutrition that is provided from other products like meat and milk and so on to have a strong body. And that is what is happening in Guyana. We are losing out in terms of human development. We're losing out in terms of national unity while we're going after these glitzy projects. I agree that some of the projects are rich, but who's getting the money? Where's the money coming from? The Atlantic Hotels Incorporated building Marriott, then you have the Chelijagan International Airport, and you have the one laptop per family. But these are products which are not widely supported by knowledgeable people in those industries. And I maintain that it's a question of choices. It's a question of where our investment goes and what is going to be the greatest benefit from that investment. If you were a parent of a child, you have to decide whether you'll send the child to go to parties every day or whether you send the child to school. You make a choice. If the child goes to parties, the child will end up as a dunderhead at age 10 or 20. If the child goes to school, the child may end up brilliant and become an engineer. That's the choice. And those are the consequences.
Let's talk about political democracy now. What has the PPP done for political democracy in 21 years? Are we better off?
At the local level, of course not, because the PPP has not held elections for the last 19 years, the local government elections. Even now, they're delaying the bills concerned with local government. Although we can proceed with elections, it is obviously up to the government, and we have not had a signal from the government in that regard. As you know, the PPP, the Minister of Local Government and Regional Development went around the country for several months, simply dismissing elected or the remnants of elected NDCs and installing hand-picked members of the members. I don't know where they come from, but they're obviously favorites of the regime. So from the local level, we see a denial, maybe a destruction of democratic systems. When you go further up, right up the ladder to the National Assembly, we see a situation in which the PPP for over 20 years was accustomed to simply dictating the way the National Assembly would do its business. We had a serious situation last August in which the Prime Minister simply sent a letter to the Speaker stating that the government had determined that the sitting of the National Assembly be postponed. But the days for that sort of nonsense are over. And we made it clear that it was not lawful and that APNU would not abide by it. We went to Parliament, and fortunately for the country, the government side came in, but we had to challenge them. So repeatedly in the National Assembly, and at this point in time I have to refer to a study that was done in 2005, by a Commonwealth consultant, Sir Michael Davies, who severely criticized the way the National Assembly is being run under Speaker Ralph Ramkaran. In fact, he went so far to say, I'm not quoting his exact words, that the National Assembly, that Parliament was being run almost as a department of the Office of the President. Matters which were put on the order paper were determined by the Office of the President. So even if the opposition submitted matters to be discussed, they could be taken off by the Office of the President. So we're looking at a greater degree of autonomy of the National Assembly. And that is what we call the democratic governance. Similarly, there are areas of the commissions, for example, the Ombudsman or the Public Service Appellate Tribunal. These are constitutional bodies, but we haven't had an Ombudsman for 7 or 8 years. So it means that citizens who have a complaint against public officials have nowhere to go. It is undemocratic because you're really stifling the voice of the citizens, or you're smothering their opinions by not giving them an outlet. The way the government runs the state media, NCN and GINA, the opposition is almost completely denied access to these media. And in a democracy that shouldn't be, because these are entities which are maintained by the state. So these are some examples of a denial of democracy. And the PPP seems to be disinclined to make changes which would favor the flourishing of democracy.
It is quite interesting that this weekend, as the PPPC observes 21 years in office, the People's National Congress is celebrating its anniversary also. The response to this question might seem obvious, but I need to ask it anyway. What is the difference between the PPPC and the PNC as it relates to governance and managing a country?
Well, the difference was highlighted in a brief address I gave to the PNC flag raising on Friday the 4th. And I said that we are a party for national unity. We are a party that is committed to creating structures which would bring all the people of our country, all the class of our country, all the geographical areas of our country together. I think that the basic difference is that the PPP is divisive. I think the PPP knows very well what is taking place in education, that a sort of educational apartheid is emerging, that the children of the very rich have a better break than the children of the very poor, and nothing's been done to close that gap. We see an economic gap opening up between the rich and the poor, and nothing's been done to close that gap, to reduce poverty. We see a lot of unemployed people. So I would say generally APNU is concerned about human development, and we are concerned about national unity. The PPP is concerned mostly with the enrichment of a few. And it is not terribly concerned about national unity, because it has to be aware that the policies it's pursuing, or the policies it has been pursuing for much of the last 21 years, have divided this nation.
As the PNC celebrates its anniversary, how strong is the PNC in a partnership for national unity regarding the work of the National Assembly and work with the PPP? We
are in a partnership, which means that we are not alone. We cooperate and we collaborate with other parties. There are 5 parties in APNU, and we remain strong. The PNC, well, yes, we are the largest party, that's no secret, but we work along with our parties, the other partners, and in the National Assembly we were able to maintain pressure on the PPP. We came together in the first place because we had common interests. We found common ground and we had a common objective. That has not changed. We're still pressing ahead, working together to get the PPP to change its policies and to get the PPP to adopt a new strategy, a new policy, which can bring about greater happiness for the greatest number of people. So the PNC within APNU is still strong, and I'm very confident that when the local government elections are held, we will see a very favorable result, and the people are coming over to our side and they're going to support APNU.
Do you believe that the PPPC is matured enough to hear this call or heed this call from APNU for their policies to be reset, especially if APNU gets support from civil society and international organizations?
Well, it could be said, that nothing is so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And the time has come for the PPP to listen to what civil society is saying. I do believe that the voices will be raised as the time goes by. For example, there are certain measures in the National Assembly, and I'm sure that civil society is concerned about things like the money laundering. The PPP has had a Money Laundering Act for over 4 years, but it's done very little to implement the provisions of that act. The result is that revisions have to be made to that act, and we now have to go back to Parliament because of criticisms made by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. So, yes, I call upon civil society, I call upon experts, I call upon Guyanese citizens who are interested in bringing about betterment in our country, because we all have to speak with one voice. This is the whole idea behind APNU. APNU is not just another party. It is really a collection of parties, and we are open to membership by other parties and other groups. You don't have to be a political party. You could be a non-governmental organization as long as you share the objectives of APNU.
As we prepare to pull the curtains down on this edition of the Public Interest, what are some of the possible consequences for Guyanese if policies are not reset?
Well, to start with, we already have a very bad situation in terms of poverty. People will become poorer. Poverty will become more widespread. That is, I suppose, going to be the most visible consequence. In terms of education, we have put a lot of emphasis on education because our young people have to inherit this country. If there's no real change in education, there'll be more dropouts, there'll be more disorder in the primary schools. I think the ability of Guyana to undertake projects, even simple road building, bridge building, will suffer, building walls, because we need engineers to do these things. If people are not properly educated also, they'll find difficulty in getting employment. And you'll have more children, more young people roaming the streets. In fact, they should be in university. They should be qualifying to become scientists to help develop the country. If there's no change in the local government situation, we will discover that the empowerment or the failure to empower the regions, empower the neighborhoods, will have a knock-on consequence because the neighborhoods will not be properly governed. The government must realize it cannot run neighborhoods from 4th Street, Kingston, where the Ministry of Local Government is located. It has to empower the people. When there's a flood, when there's a solid waste management problem in a community, the first people to respond should be the neighborhood. But if the neighborhood is not empowered, if the neighborhood doesn't have funds, and this is what the 4 bills are about in the National Assembly, they're not ornamental bills. These are bills made to ensure that the local authorities, the neighborhoods, function more efficiently. So if we do not see change in the PPP on this its 21st anniversary in government, Guyana will be poorer and the quality of life will be reduced.
Okay, and in the final few seconds, sir, are you confident that David Granger and A Partnership for National Unity have the support of the Guyanese people?
I'm fully confident in that, fully confident.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. David Granger. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.